Batman Arkham Asylum was a massive success when it first released in 2009. This game paved the way for superhero games and single-player games in general, not to mention spawning a number of sequels for the Arkham series. Up until this point, superhero games weren't that great. The early Spider-Man games had a few good ones, but Batman Arkham Asylum brought us to a new era. It brought the comic book world to video game format and introduced the now extremely popular free-flowing combat system that you see used in a lot of games these days. This game also came out while the Dark Knight trilogy was still ongoing, so it was just a recipe for success. It was easily the best Batman game to ever grace our screens when it released, and is still seen as a great game today. It's been 11 years since this game came out, and with the new Batman movie and Gotham Knights game around the corner, I felt like it was finally time to go back and start reviewing the games of the Arkham series. So I booted up the game on PC and dove back into the Asylum. Arkham Asylum starts off with this fantastic opening. The Joker has been captured by Batman and being transferred into Arkham Asylum, where he will spend the rest of his days with all the crazy psychopaths who call the Asylum home. Only you can tell almost immediately something is wrong. There's tension in the air as you slowly walk the Joker through the Asylum. He keeps foreshadowing and cracking jokes about his escape. It's such an uneasy feeling, like you just know something is to go wrong, and surely enough, the Joker takes out the one guard who was with him and escapes into the depths of the asylum that just so happens to be completely overrun by his crew. The Joker had planned this for months, and now Batman has fallen right into his trap as he is stuck on Arkham Island in the asylum with thieves, killers, and supervillains, and he must fight his way to the Joker. Such a good opening, and it really sets the tone and premise for the game. You can tell this is going to be one long and rough night. Now, what runs this game and basically every Arkham game story is the Batman and Joker dynamic. It's just a classic. It's so iconic. We've seen dozens of renditions, and Arkham Asylums is very well represented. The voice acting for Joker and Batman is incredible. Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy have such a great understanding of these characters since they've been with them for so long, and their relationship, and it's portrayed through the dialogue and cutscenes. The Joker may be insane, sure, but he actually has a plan this time, and it feels like you walk into an endless amount of traps in the asylum, and you always feel like you're a good 10 steps behind. He plans to use the venom that's used to enhance Bane's strength, improve it, and then basically create his own personal army of Banes to destroy Gotham. And even though the Joker is the main villain here, there's a huge and vast variety of iconic Batman villains in the story. We have Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, Killer Croc, Victor Zsasz, Bane, Scarecrow, etc. Each villain has their own agenda, their own plans and goals, and their own ways of messing with and fighting Batman, and Batman, being the total badass he is, has to work his way through all of them one by one. The villains have every advantage in this situation. They have Batman trapped in the asylum, and Batman is constantly having to learn and adapt as he goes. There's of course other iconic characters from the Batman universe like Jim and Barbara Gordon, who seem to be Bruce's only allies. He's literally facing an army on his lonesome, and I just love the concept so much. This may sound a bit tired and redundant, but it really does feel like you're playing in a Batman comic book or movie, or I guess as IGN would say, it really makes you feel like Batman. All the different characters, villains, and locations are brought to life really well, and while the rest of the game may have aged, the one thing that will never age is this story. The free-flowing combat system that is so popular today and that has been adapted and used by numerous single-player games was basically invented by Batman Arkham Asylum. The combat is smooth, responsive, and intuitive. It requires that you always be heavily focused on the action and who exactly you're fighting, because each enemy type requires different strategies for taking them down. The combat is a little less refined and more unforgiving than the later entries of the Arkham series. For example, you can't double counter, you can't hit enemies while they're on the ground. Sometimes you'll just randomly punch the air and lose your combo for no reason, and you can't cancel your attacks while doing a ground takedown. It may be unforgiving, but it also makes the combat a little more challenging. You have to be a lot more careful than in the other Arkham games, and it's much harder to build up those large combos. And even though it may not be as polished as, let's say, Arkham Knight's combat system, one thing Asylum does have over it is that a lot of people like the realism of Asylum's combat. In the newer Arkham games, especially Arkham Knight, it almost looks like Batman Batman is gliding or teleporting when he attacks enemies at a distance. It's smooth, but it can look a little ridiculous. Arkham Asylum looks a lot more realistic, which may be a good or bad thing depending on your preference, but either way, I think Arkham Asylum's combat system, while rough around the edges, is still really satisfying and a lot of fun, and that's all that really matters at the end of the day. The stealth system, while albeit very simple, is also a lot of fun. You can stealth take down enemies, perch and grapple on gargoyles to sneak up on people. You get to live out your Batman fantasies and strike from the shadows. I genuinely enjoy the stealth in Arkham Asylum, and it works perfectly for the style and setting of the game. Something I also really love about the enemies in this game is that as you get stronger and more comfortable with the combat and stealth, the enemies themselves will also start to learn and adapt. For example, they start wearing these collars that send out alerts whenever they are knocked unconscious, so enemies know you're around. They start placing proximity bombs on the gargoyles to prevent you from grappling onto them for too long. Some enemies use knives, firearms, or shock batons that force you to fight them differently and more carefully. There's some solid enemy variety, and each has a different strategy for when you take them down, and I love how they become stronger as you do, making the game harder as you progress instead of easier. Arkham Asylum also has a ton of fun little Batman gadgets you can use, like the Batarang, line launcher, explosive gel, the Batclaw, etc. You just keep upgrading and unlocking more gadgets the deeper into the game you get, and it allows you to take down enemies or reach different areas and locations in a way you couldn't before. And probably one of my favorite parts about this game and about this series in general are the boss fights. Each boss fight is different and unique. Each boss has different weak points that you must exploit, and they all require different strategies to do so. There's a large variety of boss fights, and most of them are great, except for the Poison Ivy and final boss fight, which I found to be a little underwhelming and lackluster personally. But the Bane boss fight was a ton of fun, and the Killer Croc one was really unique, and how you had to be careful not to make too much noise while walking across the wooden boards to avoid making sound waves in the water that Croc could hear. There are some really unique elements to these boss fights, and this was done even better in Arkham City, and I think that game has some of the best boss fights in video games, period. The Arkham Asylum is the perfect setting for a Batman game. It's creepy, dark, and extremely confined and narrow. You're stuck in this dark, creepy place with the criminally insane, and the atmosphere is just fantastic. There's a ton of tight corridors and hallways, lots of vents you have to crawl through. It's a very confined and almost claustrophobic space. It's also very linear, which I don't really mind. In fact, it's a nice change from all the huge open world games we see nowadays. I love the open world Arkham games as well, but Asylum is a very unique and enjoyable setting for the series. Although it can feel like a maze sometimes, which can be really frustrating when you're trying to find your way to the objective. But Arkham Asylum, like all the other Arkham games, takes place during one night, and it feels like the end of a very long journey when you finally make it out on the other side. And despite being an 11-year-old game, on PC at 1440p, the game actually looks really decent. Cutscenes are like 720p, 30 FPS, that looks pretty horrible, but I think the game itself still holds up very well. I mean, I think the game's age is still pretty obvious just from the audio and visual quality, but it in no way makes the game unplayable, and chances are, if you're looking to play this game, you really shouldn't care about how it looks. And again, it doesn't even look bad at all, so it's a win-win. Batman Arkham Asylum paved the way for a new style of single-player games, and it of course led to many sequels for the Arkham series. It's not my favorite Arkham or superhero game, but it's an important and iconic one, and still great and a lot of fun to play in 2021, so definitely check it out if you haven't yet. I'm really glad I finally got around to replaying and making a video on this game, and if you want to see me make reviews for others in the series like Arkham City next, then let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, I've made a ton of others like it for so many different games at this point. I have a whole playlist called Game Reviews if you want to check those out, and consider subscribing for more in the future. I also have a Discord server, the link for that is in the description, and other than that, thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day, everybody.